to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. Today, we're going to be talking about a very interesting organization, the World Affairs Council in Kentucky and Southern Indiana. My guest is an expert on this topic. My guest today is Zhao, who is the Executive Director of the World Affairs Council in Kentucky and Southern Indiana. In addition to international exchange programs, she has overseen dozens of programs and events that brought top diplomats, experts, and authors to the Kentucky-Indiana region, providing the community an opportunity for in-depth discussions on current global issues. Zhao, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Thanks, Bill. It's always good to talk with you.
I appreciate you being with me today. Why don't we just dive right into it? What is the World Affairs Council of Kentucky and Southern Indiana?
Sure. Well, we are almost 40 years old or young, I should say. Our organization is we're a nonprofit, non-governmental, and nonpartisan organization, really with a mission to engage the Kentucky and Southern Indiana region on global issues and with leaders from around the world. So we do this by facilitating international exchange programs, most of them sponsored by our federal government, but also other sister city exchanges, as well as convening dialogues and speaker conversations around global issues that really connect us locally as well as globally. So our goal is really to inspire more curiosity on global issues and then really creating connections that count for all of us.
Now, is the World Affairs Council, is that a group just in the United States, or is that worldwide? And if so, how many are there?
Yes, the World Affairs Council is part of several, it's part of a network. There's a World Affairs Councils of America network. It's a network of about 90 local councils like ours. They range from small to very large organizations, but we all share that same mission, which is to bring light, bring engagement for our local communities with the global topics that really affect us increasingly these days. But many of them range from, just a few years old to several decades to even marking their 100 years. So many of the organizations like ours, they really started around the end of World War I. The idea is to really bring more information to the local communities, the individual, really at the grassroots level, the knowledge about what's happening around the world, because as you know, the US traditionally have been very much outside of many of those world wars, physically being very distant. So it's really came out of that tradition of organizations, grassroots organizations like World Affairs Councils and foreign policy associations. So that's how we really came about. And yes, there's about 90 of us scattered out throughout the country, only in the US. They range from small communities to very large cities. So a very powerful network, a very important network, especially in this day and age.
It certainly is to provide information with some very complex issues and issues that do impact our lives. We think they don't, but they do. They do. We see it every day. It happens. If you scratch the surface and look a little deeper into the issue, it does affect us. But now, let's see, your website is www.worldkentucky.org.
That's correct. Yep.
Okay, great. All right.
We have a lot of information up there. But your point is so well taken. We don't realize, and I say this all the time to our members and to just in general, is that we often think about global as being beyond us and not really with us. And in fact, if we look around, global is everywhere, right? Whether it's in the items that we consume, we buy, or the people, our neighbors, right? Everybody comes from somewhere. And increasingly, particularly in Kentucky, we're a large, refugee resettlement region. So we're getting people from all over the world, from all kinds of backgrounds, culturally diverse, that's coming into our neighborhoods and becoming our neighbors. So increasingly, this global is really not an other, it's really here within our community. So, that's why, as you say, we may not notice it, but it's so important for us to really understand who and what makes up our communities.
It certainly does. And if we stop and think about it, well, in Kentucky's rapidly moving in to be one of the major international distributors of a lot of products. You look at with the Ford Motor Company, Toyota Motors in Georgetown, and a variety of other groups around here. So we're actually getting into we've been in the international trade market for decades, eons, come right down to it, but in a much bigger way today. And there are literally hundreds of thousands of jobs that depend upon that reverse economic investment that comes into the state. You look at the people in this state and other states, they're international travelers. They fly to other parts of the world. You see that they can be affected by terrorists. They can be affected by diseases. It's just on across the board. And this belief that we can just build a wall around the United States is just absolutely fallacious, isn't it? It's just not going to happen.
It's not going to happen. And, but there, as you know, Bill, as we look around the world, there's increasingly a tendency for not just the US, a lot of countries, right? A sense of what we call kind of a tribalist tendency, a mentality, is really this fear of a lot of international engagement because, I mean, frankly, there's a lot of conflicts happening, right? And I think that natural tendency is for us, how do we close ourselves off so we're not drawn into these kinds of conflicts? And like it or not, unfortunately, especially in the US, and US being the big power it's been for the last century or so, it's very hard to disengage. And so within that kind of context, we have to think about how do we make sure that we're well informed, our public's well informed, so that they can manage and handle all of this kind of pressure, the things that they see on TV, the things that's happening in their neighborhoods, so that they can process it in a very constructive way rather than in a very kind of destructive, if you will, a way that's not very healthy, right? For them to go and so we provide that space. We want to be that space where we can bring people together. We bring in people who really talk about some of these big issues in a deeper, much more of a kind of a expert, people who's really done the work, who's done the research, who's worked it, to be able to give us the right information, because we all know there's a lot of disinformation out there. And so we want to make sure that we have good analysis of what's happening and then let people make up their own minds.
Exactly. That's exactly the way it should be. And of course, most of the people watching, I'm guessing everybody watching this program and others, I want to make sure that we don't wind up picking up the tab for everybody around the world. And that's one of the reasons that we're involved in groups like the United Nations. So you have economic burden sharing. If you have a UN peacekeeping mission, you have everybody not everybody, but the countries that are able to do it chipping in to cover that mission. If you have other problems, international problems, you work together with other countries in helping to resolve that particular issue. And it really needs to be that way. Well, we're going to get into your programs in just a moment, but I'd just like to remind our viewers, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is a privately funded, independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guest. We'd invite our viewers to go to our website at www.globalconnectionstelevision.com to view previous programs. If you're involved with a PBS or community access television station, or perhaps an intra-campus television hookup, or you have a podcast, or you just have a computer, you like our shows, and you'd like to share them, please feel free to do so. Global Connections Television is provided at no cost as a public service to help us better understand international issues and how they impact our lives. Today, we're taking a look at a very interesting entity, the World Affairs Council of Kentucky and Southern Indiana. And my guest today is Zhao, who is the executive director. Your group has a wonderful track record. in the area, the Kentuckiana area, as they call it, and you're involved in so many activities. Let's talk a little bit about some of your international programs. What you had an international visitors program, is that correct? Is that
Yes, we our mission to promote global engagement and connections really is very three-dimensional. We're one of the few organizations that really focus on this in the different ways. So one way is through international exchange. We facilitate programming for leaders that come on many of these programs that are federally funded, most of them by the State Department. The particularly prestigious one is the International Visitor Leadership Program, which sends leaders from around the world, usually selected by our embassy leaders in other countries, to come to the States for a couple of weeks, where they get to go to different communities and learn about America and Americans in a very personal way. So they connect with people in their profession, connect people in a cultural way, having dinners or gatherings, knowing the history of that location. All of that is meant to contribute to a better and more nuanced understanding about what America is. So often people come on these programs, they go back and they say, this really kind of brings the American, ideals and the American life and who we are to life in a way that the television shows that they watch do not, right? And it breaks down all that stereotype. And so that is the exchange program is one of those programs that we facilitate. When we have these programs come into our communities, we match them up with professional resources based on their topic, their interests, and then add some cultural element to it, so that they get a very holistic view of what is Kentucky, what is Louisville, what's Lexington, Frankfurt, how does that fit into the overall fabric of America, and then they go to a different city and they see the unique aspects of that particular city, and all of that form a what we call kind of a three-dimensional view of what America is. And it's a powerful program. If you ask any diplomat, any embassy staff overseas, this is the one, program that they really hold dear to, because it's a preemptive way of preventing war and conflict with other countries, because you make friends from these people-to-people exchanges. So that's the International Exchange Program. We're very, very proud of that program. We want to always do more with it. And then, of course, something you alluded to earlier, we convene a lot of programs locally at the community level, where we bring in experts and diplomats, authors, to come and talk about issues of the day, global issue of the day. For example, recently we had Dr. Tegan Blaine from the U.S. Institute of Peace come and talk about the impact of climate change, not just globally, obviously, all of the impact on natural disasters, on migration, and then tying that to our local community. We had her in conversation with, for example, the environmental reporter at WFPL, Ryan Van Velzer, who know a lot about how climate change really affects Kentucky, and just bridging that gap, the idea of how climate change is a universal problem. It's a problem we're all facing, and we've seen the devastation of that in the floods and the tornado in the last couple of years. So it really just kind of bringing an expert perspective and a local view and combining it in a way that people really sense and feel that it's important to me.
That is so critical, to show people at the local level, like where you live, where I live, how we're impacted and how we're involved in this, and to start thinking about what we can do to help attack these problems and overcome these problems. You mentioned a minute ago, we'll get back to your international visitors in a moment, but you mentioned the people-to-people concept and putting people-to-people in touch with each other. And that reminds me, as I recall, wasn't it President Eisenhower that created the People to People program and Sister Cities International
Yeah,
back in 1955 or 56, something like that.
something
I
like
may
that.
be
I
wrong on
thought,
that date. Don't hold me on that date. But it was back in the 50s. I do remember that.
yes.
So I remember reading it. And so anyway, now you're involved in a major Sister Cities International project, are you not?
Well, we have Sister Cities of Louisville used to be a separate organization, and they managed we have 9 sister cities in Louisville. In Lexington, they have a number of cities. So every single city have some cities, sister cities from around the world. So we have 9 in Louisville, and we took over the kind of the management and administration of that relationship back in 2020. And so what we've been trying to do is really to kind of reestablish those links with those cities. They range from basically we have a city in every continent except Australia and Antarctica, which I don't foresee any eminent sister cities in those parts. I mean, the further they get, the more difficult it is to communicate because of the time difference. But at the same time, it's been a lot of fun, but it's also it makes you really appreciate how important it is to have these relationships, right? Because cities face many similar problems. We often think, this is happening in our city, whether it's crime, housing, or all of these things that we talk about. But in fact, all cities face that, and they just do it. They have different various degrees of challenge with all of these, whether it's climate change resilience, right? And depending on where you are geographically. So I think Sister Cities has really kind of been a nice way for us to kind of, again, bridge that global local divide and see, find ways where can we learn more and bring some of these similarities together and to share in some of these really interesting cultural unique cultural elements that each of the cities offer. And just kind of it's been really nice because as we talked about earlier, as we become much more tribal in our thinking, the cities, when you have this relationship, because it's a mayor to mayor kind of a memorandum of understanding established, so it's a formal relationship. That kind of commitment really kind of adds another layer of commitment, right? And it helps when you want to do certain projects in a certain city. We have all the doors that can open for you to, whether it's investment, whether it's establishing a cultural connection with some other institution or with a university or with schools. So we have started doing a lot more exploration around that. And then next year, in fact, we're going to be leading a trip to Mainz, Germany, one of our sister cities. It's going to be 30-year anniversary between the two cities. So we're very excited about doing that. So, a lot of really exciting things down the road for sister cities.
Exactly. Yes. Have you had any delegations? I know you have 9 cities. That's a lot. That's a lot.
Not all of them are active.
Right. Exactly. I can imagine that. Yeah. I think you had one in Argentina. You had one in France.
Yep.
A variety of other places.
Yes.
Have you had any delegations come visit Louisville, Southern Indiana lately, or do you have any coming soon?
Yes, we have not. Tamale, Ghana is another sister cities that we have had for a number of years. They have come a couple, I think, several years back, but we don't get too many delegations coming here. It's not as easy coming to America for some cities as it is for us to go to other cities, right? We have that privilege. European cities, perhaps, but many other cities require a visa, and the process is just not that easy as we would like. So we hope that there might be more opportunities in the future. That's why it's easier to do it around specific programs or projects. So if you do a mission abroad, or you do a student school exchange, those are very specific ways that people can exchange and travel to meet and to learn from each other.
They certainly are, and it's very important that we do that. Yes, but you've been involved in this for several years. What have been one or two of the most memorable events or people you've met over the years that have really well, I'm sure you've met dozens of them probably, but are there one or two that really come to the surface?
Uh, well, they all, it's really the topics that they've explored. We, like I said, recently we had our own person here in Kentucky, Chris Kimmel, who was one of the founders of the Idea Fest that went on for many, many years previously. And now he's kind of a co-founder of Space Tango, or also Humanity in Deep Space, which is really interesting because when we think about space and outer space exploration and technology and the whole business around it, we don't really connect that to Kentucky. How does it fit? And Chris, really kind of, I wouldn't say, he may not say that he started it, but he really kind of brought that to life in Kentucky, and what, as one of the kind of organizations or businesses that's very close to involved with NASA and some of the space exploration projects out there. I think that was a really fascinating conversation that he had with Nat Irvin, who's at U of L, a great thought leader himself. But it's, that was a really interesting topic because we don't really think about space as, something that we would explore in a World Affairs Council program. But when you start thinking about it, that's as universal as you're going to get. I mean, it's literally out there. It's literally out there.
Universal.
Right. It's very universal. But it's fascinating because outer space, space exploration has become such a big research area, and it's much more mainstream now than ever. A lot of think tanks you didn't used to have any kind of specific departments or research areas in space. Now you'll see that as a major component of many of the research institutions. So it's not that far out. And, we always have an eye on what is up in that next wave of what we consider global, right? And it's always going to be the territorial regional conflicts that we still see, which is very, still kind of rooted in the traditional conflicts of land, of geography, of culture and beliefs and all of that. But I think there's that next frontier of topics that we need to be aware of, which is AI and technology and cybersecurity, right? These are things that could really go beyond borders, as well as climate change that we talked about, but also space. So in addition to many of the kind of traditional things that we think about when we think about World Affairs Council, World Affairs, foreign policy, we're really thinking about how these kinds of topics that are not traditional, foreign security topics have become so because of how fluid they are and how much they are really beyond borders. So I mean, we have it's really fun for us to think about what is next and to find the right people to come and share those insights with our public, our members. And I think there's going to be a lot of really interesting stuff coming down the pipe next year. So, whenever people interested, go to worldkentucky.org because we're going to have some interesting programs down in 2024, especially around election year, I guess.
Well, it sounds like you got great programs right now. And you were talking about exports a few years ago. Still may be the case, I'm not sure, but for many years, the number one export from Kentucky was aerospace equipment.
Yes.
Which most people would probably think, well, maybe Kentucky Fried Chicken or thoroughbred horses or something like that. I mean, that's part of it too, but still, Kentucky's very involved in the aerospace industry. But it sounds like you're doing really a great job there. And in the last 30 seconds, how do you communicate all these wonderful programs to the public? You've got your website. We know that.
We have our website. We are very active on our social media, Facebook, Instagram. LinkedIn. We hold a lot of our content on our YouTube channel. So we record all of our speaker programs and then put them up on our YouTube. So if anybody is not in the area, want to listen in, learn more about some topic, they can go to the YouTube channel to check those out. We also launched a new podcast recently in the last month or so called World Talk. It touches on global culture, society, and the different systems that we have. And it also asks how all of these kinds of issues impact us locally in Kentucky and Southern Indiana. And a lot of our conversations are with experts, but also with people with really interesting global experiences across a variety of fields, who can offer insights into that global influence on local lives. So that's another one that we're using as a platform to communicate some of the interesting things that we don't always get to talk about. So yeah, everything's on our website.
That's a good place to do it. We'll show you in Zhao. I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Thank you, Bill. Always great.
My pleasure. I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us today on Global Connections Television.